welcome to another episode of Oh What a Lovely Podcast, where popular culture meets the First World War. I'm Angus Wallace, and with me, as ever, is Jessica Meyer and Chris Kempshall. And joining us today is Lora Vogt from the National WW1 Museum and Memorial in Kansas. We're going to be discussing the museum and its current exhibition, Captured, which delves into the stories of life as a prisoner of war. Lora, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Angus, it's my pleasure.
I was going to start by asking about the museum. What's its history for those people unfamiliar with it?
So we are located in the heart of the United States, actually in Kansas City, which is located in Missouri, right across the state line, where we have been open since 1926. About 2 weeks after the armistice was declared, some Kansas Cityans came together and they wanted to create a memorial for those who had lived through and those who had died in the war. And what ended up happening was a large funding campaign where in a matter of 10 days, Kansas Cityans raised kind of $5 million back in that dollar. That's about, $35-40 million today in 10 days, which is incredible, to create this beautiful space where we are now, this lovely Art Deco building with a tower that's larger than the Statue of Liberty proper, that people can ride up in, two lovely exterior buildings that were built in the 1920s. And then we have this large expansion underground that really kind of showcases our collection. And we've got a brand new expansion that is happening as we speak. Hopefully we're not going to have any sort of construction sounds, but it's going to be opening in the late spring, early summer, where we'll have an open collection storage downstairs too. So a lot going on here in Kansas City to showcase this collection that we've had since 1920.
First of all, I don't think I realized quite how early on it was founded. For some reason, that had passed me by. But I was just wondering, were there any other attempts anywhere else in the US to create this sort of memorial? I mean, the comparator in Britain, of course, is the Imperial War Museum, which was started during the war as a way of collecting, but it's always been done on a national basis. It's very much a national museum. Of course, Britain physically is a lot smaller, but I'm just wondering, were there other states, other cities that says we need a museum, and Kansas City just won out, or was this only Missouri?
So there are some other wonderful memorials and other spaces. Part of it, which is true today as well, part of this comes down to the fundraising aspect. And we're in so many other places where, like in Canada, you may have a cenotaph in almost every town. In the United States, there's really this memorial movement where stadiums were built. People might know of Notre Dame. That stadium is actually dedicated as a memorial of World War I. The San Francisco Opera House is dedicated as a memorial to World War I. So there was this movement of making all of these different memorials kind of these community gathering spaces so that it was
living memorials.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So you've got some of these, there's a lovely memorial in Indianapolis as well. But we are the only museum that's solely dedicated to World War I in the United States. And it's just a matter of some of that civic mindedness of kind of coming together to build it. And then we had the opportunity to host 5 major Allied leaders, military leaders who hadn't been in one space before. Pershing, Jacques, Beatty, Diaz, and Foch all met here in Kansas City to dedicate the space as well. So there's kind of this international gathering that happened around it. There was an American Legion meeting that occurred here back at that time as well. So there's kind of this swell of movement to make this space what it is, and yet across the United States, we still have some incredible living memorials and museum spaces that have collections. Many of those have been brought together with World War II collections as well.
There's also a kind of, I suppose, a notable difference, because Jessica is right in, saying that the obvious example or comparison for Britain would be the Imperial War Museum. But the Imperial War Museum is government funded, whereas the National World War I Museum isn't at all, is it? It's not supported by kind of government grants or anything along those lines. So it's a kind of a national yet independent museum. outside of state control.
Yeah, I'm not wearing a park ranger hat today as we talk. We do not have any sort of earmark within the federal budget for our location, which does make it quite different than the IWM and the things that are happening there. I tell the joke, actually, that we, to our knowledge, we're the second oldest collecting institution of World War objects. We're second to IWM, but they started collecting before we even joined the war. So I feel really good about second place in this instance. But it is, we don't have that same connection to our federal government, which does allow us to tell that global story. And we've been so lucky, especially around the COVID era, where we have gotten support from the National Endowment of Humanities and from IMLS and some of other spaces where they've recognized the work that we've been doing and have been supporting not only just within good marketing, but also with some additional funding to help do things like our transcription project that happened during COVID when the museum building was closed officially for 6 weeks. We turned every guest service-facing staff member to transcribing cursive letters within the collection. And we have over 15,000 pages of letters that have now been transcribed and are available for anyone to take a look at on our website, www.theworldwar.org. And they can kind of dive into some of those things and really kind of leaning into that. So with organizations and institutes that have been rallying around cultural institutions, especially as we kind of are hitting the end of the COVID era, we've been lucky to have that community, state, and national support while also really being this very independent cultural institution.
Because obviously I visited in 2016. It was like autumn 2016 time. And while I was there, beavering away in the reading room, which is, super downstairs in the bunker basement bit, somebody stopped by and was talking to the archivists there. I was like, oh, I've got some stuff from T. Lawrence that I think is super interesting and super cool. And they were showing it to the people. And the archivist was kind of asking, so what are your plans with it? And they said, I tried to donate it to like the Imperial War Museum and a bunch of museums in England, and they just didn't appear to be interested. And obviously then they had to stop their conversation because my head rhythmically bouncing off of the desk in front of me was interrupting things. So I suspect people find it easier to bring stuff to you and get it properly examined than some of the museums over here.
Well, there is a space issue to this, because I remember during the centenary, I'm not sure if I've told this story before. I'm sure I've told it to you, Chris, at some point. But during the centenary, when I was working on the World War I at Home project, which was this BBC AHRC project to collect 100 or to produce 100 radio stories for each BBC region about the First World War. And as part of this, I was asked to go on to BBC Radio Leeds on the morning program. I think it was Radio Leeds. It was either Radio Leeds or Radio Sheffield on the morning program and say, we're doing this project. If you have a story, we'd love to hear about it to try and collect local stories. And, please get in contact with us if you have a story, if you have documents that you might think would be interesting. And I've been talking a little bit about the Little Collection, which is the University of Leeds Special Collections. As part of this is to explain where the First World War existed in Yorkshire already. And the radio presenter said, yes, if you have any documents that you want to donate, please contact the University of Leeds Special Collections, the Little Collection, at which point I had to hang up very quickly and get on the phone to the Special Collections archivist and say, look, I'm really sorry, that wasn't supposed to happen. But the thing is, they don't still have the storage space, and Missouri's a bit more spacious than West Yorkshire. Can I just
It is. Being able to store the variety of things is always a real challenge. If museums collected everything, they would just be hoarders. So the archivists, they really are that first line of defense. They are so very important. in building these great collections. Yeah, and we've been so lucky during the centenary to work with so many different organizations. And as we're heading into this next season of telling the stories of the First World War, being able to really connect with our friends over at the IWM, within the Australian War Memorial, in Germany, in we've got some museums that we're working with in Bulgaria, and being able to have all of these organizations kind of bringing their best ideas together and understanding what these different collections hold. It's so important to be able to tell the history well and to do it in a way that I think shares that enduring impact, and hopefully doesn't have any archivists like literally pulling their hair out.
Going, help, what do I do with all these letters?
We should absolutely do an episode with the Bulgarian War Museum people. That sounds great. I know nothing about it, but that's never stopped me before.
Didn't know there was a First World War Museum in Bulgaria.
There are some outstanding museums all around that we can get connected, but we're not going to do it on the podcast because I'm not going to make the same mistake as the BBC radio presenter.
Now, shall we move on to look at Captured, your the story of the prisoners of war?
My absolute pleasure.
Before we dig ourselves into a deeper hole, where did the story come from? Who pulled that one out of the hat? Because it occurred to me that stories of prisoners of war from the First World War are hugely overlooked, mainly because there's masses of films about escapes from the Second World War, and whilst there is prisoners of war stories from the First World War, I just couldn't help but think that the Second World War has taken all the oxygen out of it. So where did that come from?
So back in 2019, we were meeting with our then archivist, Jonathan Casey, and our senior curator, Doran Cart, and our now director of exhibitions, Stacey Peterson. And we were just brainstorming different ideas and thinking about what we had within the collection. If you know of museum professionals, when all of a sudden they really get this great idea and they just light up. We were on a call, and the idea about prisoners of war came up because we do have some really incredible one-of-a-kind pieces, and we had just gotten this extraordinary album into our collection that had watercolors and photographs. And so this idea, as soon as our collection staff started talking about what we have within our collection that reflect that global experience of prisoners of war, and we knew we really had something. And then we reached out to Heather Jones, and she's just extraordinary and so lovely to work with. And so we shared this idea with her and asked if she'd become a part of our project as well. And then it all came together to create Captured, which looks at the stories behind the wire. You all have been and seen so many of the different centennial exhibitions and the like, and it really is a story that hasn't been told, and it is so formative in the kind of experiences and what we think we know about prisoners of war and war camps after World War I. It really does set the stage for these kind of global prison camp experiences, but in a very different way. It is an intersection of history that shows this humanity, where the complete destructive nature of this war that people thought would be over, by Christmas. And you have millions of prisoners that no government had really planned for. So you've got this intersection where there are people who are really ethically trying to do the right thing, where you have logistics that are nearly impossible, that you've got the military and all of the rules and regulations around that. And you have these, again, 8 to 9 million prisoners around the world. And it becomes one of the most globally shared experiences of the war. And yet every individual story is so different. So there is within this within this, there's so much humanity to be exploring, to be sharing, and it's easy to see when you are also able to look at the different objects and see the photographs and see the different pieces that we have within the exhibition here in Kansas City, Missouri.
It's interesting. I just wanted to pick up on Angus, your question about whether the memory of the war is because it's been overshadowed by the Second World War. But actually, it's quite interesting because I think the prisoners of war were ignored right from the start. And this is a point that Ian Isherwood makes in writing about publishing, that there are attempts to publish prisoner of war memoirs, but there's something still slightly shameful about being a prisoner of war, certainly in the Anglophone, from the Anglophone perspective, that you were supposed to be out there fighting and doing your duty, and you're prevented from doing this. So you're not a war hero, and it becomes that much harder to tell the story. So even right from 1929 or even earlier, there's just not the stories being told. So even before the Second World War, I think prisoners of war are a bit of a hidden history, if you will.
There's some historians who are doing some really incredible work on that. There's no existing, global map of all of the different locations. There's not one particular list. And so I'm so thankful for the many who have been endeavoring to be bringing those things together. And also for those autobiographies, for those individuals who wrote those books. And it's interesting, that spectrum of experience. You have people like Charles de Gaulle, who takes his time as a prisoner of war and lets that fuel his military career. Most of his First World War experience is reading about it. And there's some really interesting history and individual quotes to be looking at through him and through those who were around him at the time. And so that kind of fuels his successes. In the United States, there's a gentleman by the last name of Halliburton, who actually is our last story that we tell within the exhibition. He is one of the first Americans who was captured, and his photograph was being used by the Germans as propaganda. And yet an American artist took it and kind of took this slouched posture that he has in this photograph and kind of makes it this very defiant stance with his hands kind of in his pockets, which you aren't supposed to do, within the military. And it becomes this fundraising effort. And so Halliburton's name gets well known inside the United States, that his actual experiences, he's transferred to prisoner of war camps, becomes this leader among them. He ends up having a really difficult personal life. And so it is later in the 20s and early 30s where he's writing his own memoir. And at the end of it, it basically says that he has been captured, he has been caught, and he has been hung because of his notoriety as this prisoner of war, and that it kind of always is just kind of haunting. It's kind of haunting him. So it is this very individual, case by case, personal experience, and how that then plays out. You can see some of these larger trends that happen. There are certainly mental health issues that really stick for many of these individuals. And then there are folks like Joseph Pilates, who was interned at the very beginning of the war, who ends up turning the exercise routine that he starts and that he does for like these 3 to 4 years, where he's on an island with all these other guys, that he takes that and turns this into the Pilates that we know today, this entire exercise, juggernaut. It was really a pleasure, and it was an honor to be able to be looking at these different stories, and to look at the relationships that many of these men formed with each other as well. You end up having some who are, lifelong kind of pen pals, and they go visit each other's families. And we've got a Russian balalaika in our collection because it was given from one prisoner to a Russian prisoner to an American prisoner after after the war as they continued their friendship.
This is tying quite nicely into our December episode around battlefield tourism. I love the idea of these men visiting each other.
Just on that international aspect, because Oliver Wilkinson, who's also done stuff on prisoners of war, he tells the story, I think both in his book and in talks that he's given about it, that and this I suspect this is more of a kind of like a 1914 Allies issue between Britain, France, and Russia. Obviously, there's like a hierarchy within those of those who think they are, the most worthy. And in prisoner of war camps, there's also a hierarchy of, who's going to get treated the worst. It's probably going to be the Russians.
And then you also have you've got the Russian Civil War that happens right around there too. So it gets really dark. It gets real dark.
And and hugely complicated. But you get moments within that kind of opening years of the war where the British and the French are complaining via embassies to the Germans their prisoners are being put in the same camps as the Russians. And we're not here for that. We're not here to actually exist alongside these people. And I can't remember which the British the German kind of equivalent of the Foreign Office through one of their embassies sends a really snarky note that is kind of to the various allies, which is basically, if the Allies don't actually want to spend any time together, maybe they should think more about the types of people they make agreements with, which is a really pointed but quite clever critique of you're happy to go to war with these people, but you're not happy to exist in the same camp as them. That seems like a problem. That seems like a you problem as far as we're concerned. But that idea that actually there's a hierarchy in the camp and we're not supposed to be here with them because they're weird and they're not like us.
I presume there's not a vast amount of American POWs, and I don't know if is the prisoner of war camps in America for Germans. How do you make an exhibition on prisoners of war relevant to an American audience who might not instantly think, well, I'm not sure, I don't know anybody who's been a prisoner of war? The connections might not instantly be there to draw people in.
The delight is that we do have, especially within the United States, we do have so many who are deeply interested in history. And while there were a handful of camps inside the United States, and that's one of those things where we get the opportunity to turn a little bit on the head what some may think they know, right? It is well known about the Japanese internment camps in the United States in World War II, but there are a lot of people who are completely unaware of the German internment camps that we had in World War I. And so being able to tell that story, show some of the film footage that we have in the collection, it allows us to tell that fuller, more complex story. And there were fewer Americans, but somebody asked me once why we have such a global collection, and we are a nation of immigrants. Over 97% of our collection has been donated, and so it is these stories like Count Alexander Orlowski, whose album I spoke about earlier. He immigrated to the United States later on in life, and so he brought this experience with him. So there is that openness, I think, to learning these stories, and there is an element genuinely of hope when you look back in history and you see individuals who are going through this time frame where they are prisoners of war, where they are actually going through a pandemic as well, because you've got the flu pandemic, let alone all of the other health issues that are, there's typhus and tuberculosis and all these other things that are going through camps at the time. And the writing of these individuals, there is things to learn. There are things to be inspired by. And that's what, in part, we're lucky to do the work that we do and to have folks who are listening to this podcast, because we do kind of recognize that and the importance of it.
Can I ask, are you distinguishing between prisoner of war camps and civilian internment camps in the exhibition?
Mm-hmm. We absolutely do. It's essential to distinguish the legal rights, because if you are a prisoner of war, you have legal rights. If you are an internee, you have no legal rights. And if we start off actually at the very kind of front part of the exhibition, where we talk very frankly about Africa and our representation of colonials. Within there, we do have some beautiful photographs. We do have some pencil sketches and the like, but with as many as who served and looking at the basic ratios, we know that there is no data that correctly represents the number of Africans who were imprisoned or who were then coerced. But with so many of them, filling those roles as stevedores and as in the manual labor, they had no legal rights, and they are kind of being coerced into those other spaces. So it's absolutely essential for us to do that. We recognize that from the very beginning. So we do outline kind of a bit of the lack of information that we have. And again, I'm so thankful for historians who are working right now to try to remedy some of that information that is lacking. And then later on within the exhibition, we talk about kind of the difference between the larger prisoner of war camp and internment camps. We've got some lovely things from Nakalo that we're able to talk about. We've got some different pieces that we really like to showcase there.
One of the University of Leeds' big First World War projects was a local internment camp, relatively local to me, actually, that they uncovered a German war diary, a German camp diary, which is this amazing compilation. So it was a big translation. I must see if it's online. It was certainly published a couple of years ago now. That was one of the more fun projects that I got involved with. Meant I got to go out to Settle quite a bit and give talks.
I mean, it's incredible when you start going through the different collections, and I also have to give a shout out to people who volunteer and students and the like with different organizations who are collecting this material and who are working. We were so lucky to have a volunteer we have about 300 volunteers at the National WW1 Museum, a memorial. And one of them spent her entire career as a translator. She actually has a PhD in history that she received from the University of Vienna. And so when we had some of these objects that needed to be translated, and we're still somewhat in some lockdown, no problem at all. She was happy to do that with us and for us, which was just a delight. So if you are listening and you volunteer in different spaces, thank you so much. And if you're thinking about volunteering, you absolutely should do it.
I just wanted to ask this. It's kind of more like a process question, because how do you go about advertising something like this? Because, again, if we make the comparison with, say, the Imperial War Museum, it's, it can be a bit of a slog to get to London from somewhere in Britain, but it's not out of the realms of possibility that somebody might do it. But, if you've got people, Alaska, California, New York, Florida, how do you go about advertising? Come to the National WW1 Museum. It's only a 5-day drive. Or there are no trains because they don't exist.
I am going to correct you, sir. We are across the street from our Union Station, which does still have a working Amtrak train, and people could be taking the train from Chicago or St. Louis and be here within the day. But we've been really lucky. We host a symposium every year, and I'm going to use Alaska as our example. And we have teachers who come from Alaska every year to participate. So part of it in bringing people from across not only the United States, but across the world, it is not just the rotating exhibitions that we have in the main gallery. It's the programs. We also are really lucky to be able to host a battlefield tour every fall. This year, we're doing the war in Champagne. And, being able to connect with people on the actual ground and share stories from our collection, and creating all these different ways that make it accessible. So we are delighted to be able to market, not just captured, but every part of what we offer learners, right? Because it's a free choice experience of how you spend your time and where you go. And we are really lucky to be able to have so many from across the nation who come to visit us. And then what we knew before COVID and that we were a part of, but definitely all of our work during COVID shows it as well, is that it's also on site, online, where people really begin to engage with learning and what you have. So, we've got 500 lectures. So if somebody can't come and listen to a spectacular lecture that we might have on prisoners of war in person, like we've got one tonight on Alvin York, and more so on the others who were serving with him in these heroic moments, they can join us live online. And if they can't join us live online to ask the questions, they can be joining and watching the YouTube channel afterwards. So we have really been able to hopefully provide what people are looking for. And I'm always searching for new opportunities to make this collection that we have right here in the middle of the United States as globally accessible as possible. So if you guys have great ideas.
You put some of your exhibitions online, haven't you? Not just the talks, because this is with my International Society for World War One Studies, First World War Studies hat on. I got invited to, I think, a launch of, certainly not this exhibition, but a previous exhibition that you did, which was virtual. And sadly, I think childcare got in the way of my attending. I was really sad. I was all geared up to go, and then I had to do something with the kids. I was really impressed by that. It was, how quickly, how early you pivoted to online, much, much earlier than has been happening in Europe.
Oh, thanks. The credit to that actually goes to our president and CEO and children. You guys are going to get the way inside scoop on this. I was pregnant, and my husband had a job in a different city in the US, like 500 miles away. And so our president and CEO, Matthew Naylor, when I shared the good news with him, I describe our organization sometimes as we are pragmatic risk enthusiasts. And so he was willing before COVID to let me try working out of office. And I don't know of any other museum that has really done that, especially not with the head of education, where public programs is a big part of the work that we do. And he was willing to try that out for a year, and we were going to revisit and just test it and do something new. And when that year was going to end, would have been April of 2020. And so we had an education department who had spent 9 months, 9 months working on, almost a year working online all the time. And so when we had the opportunity, and I came together with, and we had a great team, Camila Kulig and Haley Sheriff and Cherie Kelly, and said, okay, what do we want to do? What do we feel comfortable with? They were ready to go. And when you have leadership that's really willing to try new things and the like, then we did. Within the next marketing cycle, we had online programs up and running. And because we've got friends in other spaces who are so kind and so generous to us, one of our first big online programs was with Margaret Macmillan and Dan Snow. We got picked up by the New York Times when we were doing a conversation about fashion with some individuals in France. And so we just, there's benefits when you work with people who are willing to take a chance and try something new and aren't afraid of making mistakes. It's like people learned from World War I when you're up against 20th century technology.
I was going to say the First World War, driving innovation a century on.
I was going to ask vaguely. I've got a wonderful vague link from websites because I was poking around TripAdvisor, which is universally have fantastic reviews, fantastically gushing reviews. But one word that keeps coming up is people describe it as an experience. It's an experience, which made me think, how hard is it to juggle entertainment and information? Because I was reflecting back as a child going to the Imperial War Museum, I was more blown away as a child by the fact that they installed TVs. I couldn't believe it. I was in a museum with TVs. Now, clearly things have moved a long way since then. So I just wondered how you do that now, because you've got so much at your disposal. My experience of American museums is they're just fabulous at displaying stuff that's not just, an artifact and a little card underneath. But how hard is it to juggle what's possible with and to convey the message across?
We'll see if we successfully do it here, as we're in the midst of a renovation project. Come fall, we're going to have several new interactives that are going to be up in our space come fall of 2023. Part of the main gallery, when we revisited it, was really the idea came to let the individuals who lived through the space be the ones to tell the story. And so that kind of heartbeat and working with Ralph Applebaum and Associates and kind of constructing a space that allowed you a bit of that freedom to explore on your own terms, not necessarily like a one direct line, has, I think, been really helpful in a modern era where it's not cut and dry. There's nothing about World War I that is, here is this and here's the exact story. And so being able to connect the objects with the words that we have, the stories that we had with those particular objects or the like, to be able to show that film footage on the different scrims. We've got trenches on the east side of our main gallery that people can be looking in to kind of get that feeling of what it would be like within the spaces. We do have some more immersive films, especially the one that looks at it's in Horizons Theater that explores why did the United States join this war that we were separated from, by oceans, and explores the internal conflict that the American population had at the time, leaning into it. We're in the process. We'll see how successful we get moving forward. But so much of what I think of what makes a good museum experience for anyone anywhere is being able to go in and see the object and think about the person who might have held it, who might have worn it, be able to read the story that might still be attached to it. Right? And if you really go that next level, it's not only the person who is in that Renault tank and clearly may not have survived because our Renault has a big shell pockmark at the end. But then you can start thinking about, okay, well, who was it who actually built those wooden guiding wheels on a tank? Because that's somebody else's hands. And then it's somebody else's hands still who mined that metal out. And so you get, just by looking at the object, this really deep, complex story that you can feel so connected to so quickly. So there really is something wonderful about the online experience and being able to see the things and zooming in to look at the mustaches and the mustache styling of individuals, but to be inches away from an object that was once held and worn and the like, and just be so moving. And so I think that's just part of the work that we do in any museum, and the staff who've been a part of the original opening and then the reopening in 2006, and this current staff who are working on it now continues to endeavor to be worthy of the collection that we have and to tell that story in a way that conveys it, hopefully in an experiential manner that people rave about. Yeah, that's nice to hear. I haven't looked at TripAdvisor. It's safe to not always look at Google.
I assume that what then happens after everybody's been through the experiential experience and they've seen the objects and they thoroughly enjoyed it is they then go into the gift shop and it's just a wall full of my books, and that's what I'm going to continue to assume is the case for the rest of my life. And I appreciate you all stocking that in such great numbers.
And you just need to have a Kickstarter because we don't have any that are personally signed, so you need to get a Kickstarter going.
Yeah,
come out, just sign them all again.
Yeah.
You can also go online. We have an online store where it is tax-free because we are a nonprofit, and all the benefits go to the National WW1 Museum and Memorial in the U.S. that does not actually have a federal budget earmark. So those people should feel really good. It's better than spending your money on Amazon.
So how long is the exhibition open for?
Captured is going to be in Kansas City, Missouri through April of this year. We actually are hosts of the NFL draft. If anybody is fans of American football, that's a really big deal. And so we will be, we'll have Captured open through through that time frame. And the next exhibition that we'll have within Wiley Gallery is called Bespoke Bodies. And we are working with the Design Museum everywhere to tell and look at that story of prosthetics, which anyone...
I think Jessica's about to start her Kickstarter too.
Oh, good. I got to tell you guys, most people, when I say prosthetics, don't just start giggling. So this is really
the bit you can't see is how excited this historian of medicine and disability is getting about this.
fantastic. This is the best morning tea I've ever had.
But actually, in all seriousness, I'm working on Soldier's Return, which includes looking at disability pensions, and I would love to talk about it at some point if you would like.
Yes, please. I would love that. But yeah, so we'll have bespoke bodies, and that's going to be up for almost, I believe it's going to be a full year. So if you are listening to this and you are looking to make a trip to Kansas City, Missouri, you absolutely should. There's a lot going on, and fairly soon we'll have a new airport. So it's going to be brand new, as well as, depending upon when you come, we've got a free streetcar that takes you from the river market area down to the plaza area within KC, which actually, if you didn't know, it is what was used as the basis for Beverly Hills and the Beverly Hills shopping district. Our plaza is, in fact, the Country Club Plaza is the first, one of the first shopping areas built for cars. So there's a lot to there's a lot to see.
I'll tell you what our Kickstarter is going to be. It's going to be take Oh What a Lovely Podcast to Kansas City, Missouri.
Fun. I mean, flight prices are going down, guys. You absolutely should. Bespoke Bodies is going to be here for a year up through the spring of 2024. Our main gallery, of course, is always open. And then, as I shared at the top of the show here, we have this really incredible open collection storage space that's going to be opening at the beginning part of the summer. That shows, like any museum, we have, less than 10% of the collection out on display at any point in time. So we're turning, Chris, when you were down here and in the research center, what was a big gray wall that you passed by, we're turning that into this glassed wall space with these different kind of little alcoves that really allow people to see so much more of what we have, because it really is, it's the object that inspires a love of history, I find, for so many people. You all and those listening might be able to think back to a time where they held something, maybe it belonged to their own family member, where they saw something that made them go, oh wow, this is powerful stuff. History is potent, and these individual stories still resonate today. So having that space open and being able to share that is spectacular. So yes, you should absolutely get onto a plane, come to Kansas City, come see Bespoke Bodies. If you're able to, between now and April of 2023, come see Captured, and certainly pick up the book by Heather Jones, and the work that she has done. If you are not able to join us here, it really was a true pleasure to be able to work with her on the scholarship there as well.
We're big Heather Jones fans here.
As you should be.
If you're not a big Heather Jones fan, pause the podcast. Don't turn it off, because we need you to come back. But go away and read some of Heather Jones's stuff, and then come back and press play again.
And now you've paused and returned, Chris. What are we talking about? What are we talking about next time?
Well, this is a wild swing from the World War I Museum in Kansas City. You two are off to watch Peaky Blinders Ballet, which I still cannot conceive of those two things operating together in the same space and time. I unfortunately can't go because I blocked off the thing in my calendar, and it took me 6 months to remember why I blocked it off, but I suddenly remembered just in time to do the thing. But I am intrigued and very excited, but in a kind of like a really kind of, I want you to come back and tell me a weird story. If you come back and you just go, it was Peaky Blinders and it was ballet, and basically that's all you know, then I'm going to have to ask you to go back and do it again.
Can I show up for this? Because there has to be weird stories. Peaky Blinders plays them. It's amazing.
It does fit. It does fit rather well with the sort of idea of bespoke bodies, I have a feeling. It's going to be an interesting evening.
So lovely. Well, until next time, thank you, Lora, Jessica, Chris.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming on.
Thank you all so much. This has been a real delight.
Bye.
ho,